With USC and UCLA on their way out of the Pac-12, headed for the Big Ten Conference, what's next for the Pac-12? Is it done? Is it over with? What's next for Oregon, Washington, and Utah? Because there are some rumors circulating around that the Big 12 is looking into potentially expanding their conference further and adding maybe a Arizona or Arizona State. What about Oregon and Washington? Is there a chance that they end up following in UCLA and USC's footsteps and they depart for the Big Ten as well? Because, listen, at this point, the Pac-12 is pretty much a done deal. Unless they're able to acquire some other teams. In Boise State and Nevada, I'm sorry to you guys watching this, but you're not enough to sustain the Pac-12 conference. You see, the Pac-12 has suffered from poor leadership and the fact that simply the football inside this conference has declined over the last couple of seasons. And over the last couple of years, it's been at its worst that we've ever seen out of this conference. So for Oregon and Washington, I definitely think that there's a good chance that they also join the Big Ten, and there's no reason why the Big Ten wouldn't accept either one of those schools. You look at Oregon, they have a really good fan base, and although they are located in Oregon, some people are going to say, JT, why would the Big Ten want to add Oregon and Washington? Like, what's in Washington? What's in Oregon? I understand that, but you also got to look at how much money those schools bring in. That's still a good amount of revenue, and those two schools also better the Big Ten. I can understand if you were trying to make an argument for Colorado getting into the Big Ten. Okay, Colorado doesn't really benefit or add anything to the Big Ten, but in terms of Oregon and Washington, yeah, they may not be in places that you can capitalize off when it comes to marketing and branding, but they do better your conference. So for the Pac-12, the only way I can see this conference surviving is if they merge with another conference. Maybe they come to an agreement with the Big 12 or the Big 10. But at this point, it's kind of hard to keep the Pac-12 sustainable. And with both UCLA and USC on their way out, you know, that takes a big blow to the overall strength of the conference. A conference that wasn't even all that great to begin with. And then you look at Arizona State and Arizona, those are teams that you can look at and pretty much say they're a perfect fit for the new Big 12. Because with the addition of Cincinnati, UCF, Houston, and BYU, you have programs that have a lot of upside, a lot of potential with where they're located at, and also how recruiting could improve if they were to join a legitimate Power 5 conference. Meanwhile, you look at Arizona and Arizona State, both of those two programs have been kind of viewed as sleeper programs in a sense because of how good the recruiting is in that area, and plus the fact that they're still on the West Coast, so they still have that pipeline to California. All it really takes for those schools to start trending upwards is finding the right head coach. Now for Arizona State, they currently have that situation with Herm Edwards and the investigation and whatnot for, you know, kind of breaking the rules. But that is a program that a lot of people view as kind of a sleeper program. You bring in the right head coach there who knows how to recruit, who knows the area geographically on the West Coast. Arizona State could potentially blossom in the Big 12. But that's all depending on if they find the right head coach. But pretty much, looking at the Big 12, man, I think this is a conference that definitely has potential to end up being really good. But when you look at the Pac-12 conference, this is pretty much the last that we may see of the Pac-12 for the near future. Because, I mean, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look pretty. And I understand that the Pac-12 commissioner currently right now tried to do everything he could to accommodate USC, but it just wasn't enough. And with them and the Bruins already out the door, it's only a matter of time before Oregon and Washington, they look back and they say, okay, they're out. What's next for us? And I think for Oregon and Washington, the logical decision is to move to the Big Ten. And Oregon definitely can sustain in the Big Ten. If you're looking at, how competitive they can be, they defeated Ohio State last year, and they already showed that they are really good when it comes to recruiting nationally from that area, despite the fact that Oregon doesn't really produce a lot of great talent out of high school and state. So they have to recruit on a more national scale. So for Oregon, I think they can be pretty good in the Big Ten. You look at Washington. Washington is a program that has been pretty good over the past decade, even though they are in a little bit of some down years. They brought in a new head coach, Jimmy Lake. I was just a little bit taken back by how bad things went and how quickly the program went down the drain with him as the head coach. But their new head coach that they have in place is still enough time to save Washington before it ends up becoming a dumpster fire. So if you are the Big Ten, there definitely is no reason why you shouldn't take both the Huskies and the Oregon Ducks. Plus, Oregon has, these cool uniforms that everybody loves to see. I definitely think that Oregon versus Ohio State, Oregon versus Penn State, Oregon versus Michigan are games that people would like to see. And even Washington versus Michigan, Washington versus Ohio State, that can be a pretty intriguing matchup. You see a lot of people who say that, the Big Ten may not take Oregon and Washington because of their location. They're not really marketable places. I think that's true to an extent, but at the end of the day, if you make the conference better, I really think that's all that matters. And they bring in good amount of revenue to sustain in the Big Ten and bring in more money. But let's say the Big Ten doesn't want to take Oregon or Washington. Then what's next? Do they leave for the Big 12? And what about Utah? Utah is really interesting because you wonder if the Big Ten will take Utah. And Utah has been a pretty consistent program over the last 10 years. Now, they haven't made it to a college football playoff appearance like Washington and Oregon have. But this is a program that definitely looks like they're trending upwards under Kyle Whittingham as their head coach. So maybe Utah ends up joining the Big 12. Maybe Oregon and Washington end up going there if they can't get accepted into the Big 10. But maybe the ACC comes along and they try to get into this game of expanding their conference. Because for the ACC, they're potentially a conference that people are looking at that can end up having teams stolen from them, just like how the SEC came in and took away Texas and Oklahoma from the Big 12. There's a strong possibility that maybe Miami, FSU, and Clemson can be plucked away from either the Big 10 or the SEC. So if the ACC isn't careful and they don't try to get ahead of this situation and try to build their own mega conference and try to expand, maybe we see the ACC start to fall apart in a sense. And if you take away Miami and FSU away from the ACC, things look completely different. Completely different. I know that FSU and Miami aren't powerhouses, but there aren't really too many powerhouse programs in the ACC at this point outside of Clemson. And Miami, with Mario Cristobal there, they're going to get things rolling. We don't really know what's going to happen with FSU. But now you take away Miami and Florida State from the ACC, you pretty much lose the marketing that you could have had in the state of Florida. Pretty much after that, who's going to be the ACC team in Florida? That's going to be tough. And then if you let them walk to the Big Ten or the SEC, that's a big advantage. Because now the SEC now has 3 of the major Florida schools. You're going to have Florida, Florida State, and then Miami? Come on. And then what if they leave for the Big 12? So for the ACC, I think that this is a really good opportunity that if they want to get involved in trying to assemble their own power conference in a sense, and they don't want to get left behind, and they don't want to risk losing no teams to other conferences, I think that maybe they should try to look into getting one of these programs to join them. But ultimately, where it looks like college football is heading is that it looks as if we're going to have another version of the NFL. You're going to have the Big Ten and the SEC, who pretty much are going to serve as the AFC and the NFC. Then you're going to have the Big 12, and I'm not sleeping on the Big 12. I definitely think that UCF, Houston, BYU, Cincinnati all could become really good programs inside of that conference, especially UCF, considering the fact that they have the largest campus in America. They have one of the largest alumni bases in America as well. So the Big 12 potentially is a conference that could become pretty good. Now, could they become as good as the Big 10 or the SEC? I kind of doubt it, because you're going to have to need good depth. But you definitely have a lot of confidence in the kind of schools that they acquired. They acquired schools that have a lot of upside. So for the Pac-12, man, I think it's kind of done. It really is. What's going to happen with Washington State? Does Washington State end up joining the Mountain West? Because I couldn't see the Big 12 having any interest in them, in the Cougs. So do they end up joining the Mountain West? Do they end up becoming a G5 program? What about Oregon State? Who takes Oregon State? If Oregon leaves, is Oregon State going to be the team that they travel with? Are they going to bring their little brother along? Because we've seen other schools who have made these jumps to different conferences end up bringing along their rival. Kind of as if it's a package deal. So for Oregon State, are they attractive enough to join whatever conference that Oregon joins? Or do they end up going down a level to the G5? And Oregon State is kind of in a worse situation compared to Oregon, because they are located in the same state, but they're not bringing in the kind of revenue that Oregon brings in. So the Pac-12 right now, it's not looking good. This conference is on life support, and there's not really any team that the Pac-12 can look to add that can kind of bring some life back into it. I mean, Fresno State, I don't really think so. San Diego State, Boise State, I mean, Boise State could be interesting, but I don't think that's enough. And as a matter of fact, if I'm Boise State, I'm trying to apply to get into either the Big 12 or the Big 10 my doggone self. And Boise State has been a pretty respectable program over the last decade. So if I'm Boise State, I'm not even looking at the Pac-12. If I'm going to up and jump and leave, I'm going to try to get into one of the big boy conferences. So for the Pac-12, I mean, there's not really too many teams that people can suggest that you can say, oh yeah, JT, the Pac-12 gets this school and they get this school, then they should be able to stay afloat, because nobody wants to join a sinking ship. And if you are a school that leaves your current conference for the Pac-12, you're pretty much joining a boat that pretty much has done all but sunk at this moment. I mean, they're pretty much the Titanic. They hit the iceberg, and you already have people that's already abandoning ship, getting on their lifeboats to different conferences, because the main reason for these moves is because of financing. It's because of the money. So what can the Pac-12 offer financially that these other conferences can't? Because the Big 10, the SEC, they're doing nothing but racking up the checks, baby. They're doing nothing but backing up Brinks trucks to the bank. And if I'm one of these lower tier programs like a Boise or Fresno State that does have somewhat potential to being able to be a mid-tier contender at a big tier conference, I'm not looking at Pac-12. And as a matter of fact, that could be a big mistake. Why would you join a conference that just lost two of their heavy hitters and potentially could lose more? The Big 12 got fortunate enough that they were able to get Cincinnati, BYU, Houston, and UCF, because all four of those schools are located in great areas for football, especially UCF being all around the amusement parks, theme parks. There's going to be a lot of NIL opportunities. Houston is located in Texas. We know how big football is in Texas. They got no problem when it comes to dishing out the money when it comes to keeping football going down there. We know that good and well. And they're right in Houston. Houston is one of the best cities in the state of Texas. Everybody that I talk to that lives in Florida always talks about potentially moving to Houston. People love Houston for some reason. And even BYU. BYU has a really big fan base, and they can generate a good amount of revenue as well. And their fans travel pretty well also. And Cincinnati just made it to the college football playoffs. And they got Luke Fickell. So for the Pac-12, for those of you guys who are saying that they need to expand and try to bring some other teams, I mean, what teams could they possibly bring that would, one, be willing to join that conference that's already sinking, and two, could they really end up becoming good enough to keep that conference afloat? Could they end up being a draw? I mean, I think it's going to be pretty hard to sell people on wanting to tune in to Pac-12 football to want to watch Boise State play. And I love watching Boise State play because they have the incredible blue turf. But other than that, what's the appeal? You see, when you're expanding, you want to bring in teams that people want to watch. People in Idaho probably love watching Boise State. But is somebody in Georgia or Virginia or Alabama going to want to tune in to Pac-12 football to really watch Boise State play against San Diego State? Or San Jose State? Because those are kind of teams that people are throwing out there that could join the Pac-12. I mean, if we're throwing out San Jose State, we might as well just go ahead and disband the Pac-12 now. You feel me? So, I think the Pac-12 is done. It really is. And I think that with Oregon and Washington and Utah, they're probably already flirting with other conferences. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see Oregon and Washington depart for the Big Ten as well. The Big Ten is probably saying, you know what? We already allowed USC and UCLA in. They're probably on the phone with USC and UCLA saying, hey, you think Oregon would be willing to join you guys? Heck yeah. Because at this point, it looks as if it's a race to see which conference can get the 20 teams first. So you add USC, UCLA, and then you go ahead and add Oregon and Washington. You just added 4 more teams. That gives you one more step closer to having a super conference at this point. And you wonder, what about the SEC? Because at this point, geography does not matter. What if the SEC wants to go ahead and scoop up Oregon or scoop up Utah or scoop up Washington? Because at this point, nothing's off the table. College football has been so unpredictable with the way NIL has been going, with the way that the college football playoff expansion talks are going. And that's another thing, right? If you expand the college football playoffs and you have these mega conferences, aren't you going to have no choice but to have divisions? Because if you have, 20 teams in one conference, aren't you going to have to split it up? Because isn't it kind of going to be a little bit of controversial to try to figure out who's going to have the 2 best records and who's good enough to get to the conference championship game? Aren't you going to have to break it up? And then you break it up into 4 divisions, and then you end up having a inter-conference playoffs, and then the winner ends up clinching a spot in the college football playoffs? Like, could we potentially see, you know how they have the conference tournaments for every conference in basketball, and the winner automatically gets a bid in the NCAA tournament? Could we be going that route? Could we potentially see that in college football? Could we see the SEC, the Big Ten, expand to the point that they get so big that they have to divide their conference up by 5 teams and then have a interconference playoffs to decide who their champion is and who represents their conference in the college football playoffs? Because the college football playoffs is going to expand. It's not going to stay at 4 teams, no matter if you agree with it expanding or if you disagree with it expanding. It's going to happen. It's only a matter of time. Because with the way these conferences are now starting to get built, you really can't sustain a 4-team model. And for those of you guys who love the history and the pageantry and the traditions of college football, I feel sorry for you. Because the college football that you grew up with is of no longer. This is a new age of college football. It's pretty much semi-pro. And I was telling my friend this a couple of months ago, and he was like, man, college football is always going to be college football. And I was telling him, all right. I mean, at this point, we might as well call it the NFL 2.0. Because the reason why so many people are so appealed to college football is because it's not the NFL. It's different. People love the bowl games. People love the rivalry games. In the NFL, you watch the NFL for the teams that you get attached to. But some people actually watch college football for the rivalries. And it's kind of taking it away from, what people fell in love with the sport with. So another thing is this. How do you keep some of these rivalry games? Because with all of this expansion, there are going to be some rivalries that end up getting rid of because you have teams leaving for other conferences. What about Oregon and Oregon State? That's a big rivalry. That's an in-state rivalry. Are we going to have that same rivalry every single year despite the fact that they're in different conferences? And another thing is, what about how these conference models are going to handle, out-of-conference games? Is there even a point of having out-of-conference games at this point? Because if you have a stacked mega conference with 20, maybe 30 teams, then I mean, what's the point of being able to play out of conference? You might as well just play in conference because all the talent's there. So, I am excited about the future of college football because I'm not a traditionalist. I haven't watched football or college football back in the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s. I've been watching college football pretty much from 2011 and up, so I'm pretty much part of the college football era. I'm part of this new era of college football fans. So for me, I'm really excited about where the sport is heading just because I love chaos. But at the same time, there definitely is some problems that are going to occur. But college football is going to look extremely different. And the large reason why people love college football is because it's different from the NFL. And it looks as if the next couple of years is going to be pretty similar to the NFL. The only difference is that on the field, when the games are played, you're still going to be watching college football. You're still going to be watching Oregon be Oregon. You're still going to be watching Ohio State be Ohio State. It's just that the model of the sport is just going to be completely different. It's not going to be ran the same way it has been ran in the past. And another thing that I almost forgot about, I've been trying to think about it, is what about these big name bowl games? What happens to the Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, the Little Cheez-Its Bowl? I'm just playing about the Little Cheez-Its Bowl. Don't kill me in the comment section. It was just a joke. But I saw somebody propose a very good idea earlier on the Bleacher Report app. He said that what if these conference championship games end up being kind of represented by the bowl? So say, for example, right? Let's say you have the SEC championship game. What if the SEC championship game ends up being the Cotton Bowl? You can call it the Cotton Bowl SEC championship. Or the ACC championship game being the PlayStation Cotton Bowl ACC championship or something like that. Like, what's going to happen to these bowl tie-ins? What's going to happen to the Rose Bowl? Because for a while, the Rose Bowl always was featuring the winner of the Pac-12 championship and the winner of the Big Ten championship, unless one of those respective schools went to the college football playoffs. So what's going to happen to these bowl tie-ins? Are these bowls now going to start getting a little bit more involved when it comes to the conference championships? Are they going to end up being played there at those venues? Like, there's so many questions, but it's crazy about what's going on in college football right now. But I appreciate you guys for listening to me ramble on about the state of college football. I'm really excited. I'm sorry if I talked a little bit too fast, man. This is a pretty long episode, but make sure that you guys check out the JT Sports Podcast, available on all podcasting platforms: Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts from. The JT Sports Podcast is available.